All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to our WineVine virtual tasting series. Today we're focusing on hybrid wines, or wines made from hybrid grapes, I should say. This is presented by the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, and I'm very happy to have you all here with us today. My name is Julie Purpura Hosbach, and I am the Education and Member Services Manager at the New York Wine and Grape Foundation. I am a certified sommelier through the Court of Master Sommeliers, a certified specialist of wine through the Society of Wine Educators, and Wine Spirit Education Trust 3 certified. Basically, all these things mean I'm a huge, big wine nerd, and I love discussing and appreciating wine. So thanks for joining me today. If you're joining us for the first time, just jump right in. I'll run through a little bit of the logistics of using Zoom. We've tasted so far rosés in June, sparkling wines in July, Cabernet Franc in August, Rieslings in September, and Chardonnay in October. And if you're curious to get the recordings of any of the previous ones we've done, if you missed out, just let me know and I can send them your way. Make sure you mark your calendar for December 22nd, which will be our next tasting, and we'll be tasting Cabernet Sauvignon. Before we officially kick off, I want to thank you for your involvement and membership with the New York Wine and Grape Foundation this year. We have released in August our bold new brand. You can check out our website for more details, and we're looking forward to new and exciting initiatives to benefit all of our members in 2020. If you have any requests for a specific topic, please email me or call me. I'll put my information in the chat toolbar. I'll also send out a copy of this recording so that you have for your own personal records. So if you are new to using Zoom, you can, on the bottom or the top, depending on your computer screen, you should see a little toolbar as you mouse over. There is a chat bar you can use to comment in, or a Q&A feature where you can pop up questions. This is a very participatory tasting. There are no stupid questions or comments, so please throw everything you have in the comment or Q&A, depending on if it's a comment, or put it in the chat bar, or if it's a question, feel free to use the Q&A feature. Like I said, the more you share, the better this whole tasting series will go. So you can take notes if you want. I sent out the tasting sheets ahead of time. I'm going to take notes, but it's totally up to you. And as I said, I'll send out a recording. Also, if you're new, just so you know, we'll taste through the wines and we'll talk through the various structural elements and kind of go through various steps of wine appreciation. So if you're brand new, just, again, join along, don't be shy. And after you do this month after month, hopefully you'll continue to join us. You'll become an expert and pro on wine tasting as well. So today, we're tasting wines made from hybrid grapes. The definition of a hybrid grape is a cross between two species. So without getting too wine nerdish on you, there's three main types of grape species that are grown in New York State. Vitis labrusca are native varieties like Concord and Niagara and Delaware. Those grapes are mainly used for making Welch's grape juice and jam, or grape juice and jam in general, though some wines are also made from them as well. And there's a ton of Concord and Niagara grown in the Lake Erie region of New York State. But again, those grapes are grown pretty much throughout a good portion of upstate central New York State. Then there's Vitis vinifera, which are probably the varietals you're most common or most familiar with, right? So Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Shiraz, Merlot. Those are all Vitis vinifera, which generally is, from old world European countries, now grown all over the world. A hybrid is a cross between two species. So it's taking characteristics from two different species, or and in a lab, crossing them to create kind of like the perfect conditions. So, taking the cold hardy characteristics or disease resistance from one species and hoping to get out of it the typical wine characteristics you'd want out of another species. So why was this done? Why did they ever think of crossing grape species, or really any agricultural product? But particularly with grapes, this was a big response to something that happened in the 1800s. So I see some comments coming in. Yeah, disease. So phylloxera, excellent. Phylloxera is an aphid that eats the root structure of a grapevine, and it was in the soils of the Americas when colonists came over. So when we were settled here, people had brought grapevines over, you know, from Spain, Italy, France, and they kept trying to grow grapes and the vines just kept dying because they didn't know that there was phylloxera here, which again, it eats away at the rootstock. So essentially it like suffocates the vine from getting water and nutrients and it dies. The native species, again, that labrusca, and there's other native species called riparia, they were immune to it. So they could survive it. So for a long time, we're talking, you know, all the 1700s, people kept trying to plant. And then what ended up happening is the colonists took back grapevines from here as gifts back to their old world countries, and phylloxera came with it, and it destroyed a bunch of the European vineyards, because once phylloxera is in your soil, you can't get rid of it. So there was this huge epidemic, and in the 1800s, a lot of grapevines were lost, and so they had to come up with a way to grow grapes. So two solutions came out of that: hybrid grapes, again, a cross between two species, and then also grafting, which is taking the root system of one grape series with the flowering grapefruit system of the other. So you take the trunk and the fruit and the flowering part and attach it to the rootstock of a native species, and then it grows on rootstock of a native species that is, you know, disease and phylloxera resistant, but it has the characteristics and fruit quality of the others. So that, in a nutshell, is how we came to hybrids. As always, we're tasting 3 wines from 3 different regions across the state. There are lots of other hybrid grapes. Unfortunately, we're only getting to taste 3 of them, but there are a lot out there. And if you have any questions about one you might be familiar with or have heard of, or I might try to call some out, don't hesitate to ask. So the first wine, let's get tasting, right? Best part of today. The first wine we're tasting, hopefully you were able to get all 3 of them, is Keuka Lake Vineyards. In honor of our upcoming Thanksgiving, we have Turkey Run Vignole. All right, so hopefully you're all able to get your hands on this bottle. Vignole is a hybrid that is also called Rabbit 51, what's its scientific name, and it's often produced more often actually into a dessert wine. It can be, you can find late harvest, they can just be made into sweet versions, but it does ripen well, and it grows well across New York State. So first up, a wine appreciation for those of us that are new is to take your glass, tip it at about a 45-degree angle, preferably against a white backdrop. So if you have your tasting sheet, that would be ideal. Hopefully you have good lighting, and we check out the color, right? And again, if you're just joining us for the first time, white wines tend to get darker and more golden as they age. Red wines tend to get lighter and more brickish brown. Certain grape skins have different levels of pigment color or thickness to them, so that can vary the color. Clearly, we want to make sure there's nothing, you know, floating that we don't want to consume in our glass, which is not usually a concern. But what would everybody say the color is of this wine? I would probably say pale straw. And then go ahead and swirl your glass. Remember, swirling helps aerate, get the full aroma. So the next step is smelling our wine, and this is really, really important. I would argue as important as tasting, because 85 to 90% of what we taste is from our sense of smell. Our olfactory senses are much stronger than our taste. We really only taste sour, salt, sweet, and bitter. And I should say Keuka Lake Vineyard, is on Keuka Lake here in the Finger Lakes. So that is the region we're tasting from first. And what do you smell? Feel free to type in the chat bar what you smell. Generally with white wines, we get a lot of fruit. We get certain fruits, and everybody smells slightly different, so that's fine. Again, don't be shy with your responses. Some what we call some people call minerality, or like a wet rock limestone, maybe a wet stream kind of smell going on. I definitely get that in this wine. Sometimes you might get a floral smell, sometimes not, sometimes some herbaceous notes, sometimes not. So what fruits are you getting? I'm definitely getting some melon, like cantaloupe. And almost like a, we said wet rock, but also almost like a little bit of like a hay character. Apple, a little bit of citrus. Anybody else want to comment? Don't be shy. All right, go ahead and taste it. Remember to swirl it around your whole tongue so you pick up different tastes. So structural elements. The first thing we evaluate is acidity. All wines have some level of acidity. When you think of acidity, think about biting into a lemon. Your jaw tenses, your mouth waters, you pucker. If you tuck your chin in, you'd have the propensity to drool. So all wines have some level of acidity, depending on the actual grape. Some are high, some are medium, some are low. Rieslings and Sauvignon Blancs would be typically, are characteristically high acidity. Sparkling wines are often high acidity. Viognier, Gewürztraminer tend to be more low. So how would you rate this Vignole? Also, it depends on the climate too. So cool climates tend to have higher acidity levels. Hot climates tend to have lower acidity levels in general. But again, dependent on the grape. So did your mouth water? Did your jaw tense? Do you feel mouth refreshed? I definitely did. This is definitely a wine with high acidity. It's a grape that tends to have high acidity in general. Vignole, that's often why it's made into a dessert wine, because it has such high acidity. So winemakers decide to balance that off with sweetness often. This is a dry example of Vignole. So the next structural element, sorry to jump ahead and give that away, but this is a dry wine, right? And if you weren't sure, if you thought, sometimes when we smell lots of fruit, it makes us think that a wine is sweet. But if you want to know 100% if a wine has sugar or not, like if you actually taste sugar sweetness on your tongue, plug your nose and take a sip of the wine, I promise. I promise this is in the spirit of wine appreciation. You can actually, when your nose doesn't deceive you, you can taste that there's no sweetness there, no sugar, just crisp, bright, like biting into, I think a Granny Smith apple or citrus, right? So think about what flavors you taste. But as far as our structural elements, acidity would be high, and it is a dry wine. Though it often is a versatile grape that can be made into late harvest and all sorts of different styles of wine. So another structural element we talk about generally with red wines only, or oaked whites, which this one is not oaked, are tannins. Tannins are a mouth drying effect. It feels like chalk coating your teeth and tongues. It adds a textural component. It makes you like, it has a mouth drying feeling. Your natural reaction to it is to go like it's a textural feeling that we'll talk about when we get to our red wine later today, but we don't really talk about tannins often with white wines. And then body. So when you think about the body of a wine, think about milk. Is it like skim milk, 1%, 2% whole, or cream? What is the weight of the mouthfeel? And so this wine, I would say, is pretty light, pretty much like skim milk, right? It's a light-bodied wine, which also has to do with its alcohol content. So we've been practicing, right? I know everybody thinks that they won't be able to do this when they first start, but you're all learning and doing a great job with it. When you have a warming sensation in your nose or not at all, generally that means a wine is between 8 and 10% alcohol. maybe 10.5. When you feel a warming sensation in your throat, it usually means the alcohol content is between like 10 and 12, 12.5. And then anything more than 12, generally you feel like more of a warming sensation in your chest. So does anybody want to guess what the alcohol content is in this wine? I would guess that it is probably, like, since it is a cool climate and a white, I would guess it's probably around 12, maybe 12.5. I was probably feeling it in my throat. And it is 12.9, a little higher than I would have expected. Now, wineries do have a 1.5% wiggle room to put on their alcohol content as long as it falls within the TTB, which stands for the Alcohol, Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. They have a range. For years, table wine has been between 7 and 14% alcohol, but because so many West Coast wineries and wines tend to have lately been more like 15, 16% alcohol, they have recently expanded the table wine range to be from 7 to 16%. All right, so what did everybody think of this wine overall? Now, think about this. You know, we talk about what wines to serve at Thanksgiving, and if at the end we want to save a little time to go over that, remind me. But, you know, New York State wines in general are super food friendly because we are a cool climate and we tend to have wines with a lot of acidity. Acidity is what high acidity wines with high acidity are what you want for pairing with foods, because acidity acts as a conductor of flavors to highlight, like it just highlights and brings out flavors in your food. It also cleanses and refreshes your mouth, gets you excited for the next bite. So in general, New York wines, red and white, are pretty food friendly. If you remember from September, I am a Riesling fanatic, and Rieslings generally are my favorite and are also super food friendly because they are high in acidity and very versatile. Just like the Spaniol, you can find dry in the middle and then all the way to super sweet versions. Remember, when you're wine and food pairing, you always want to keep your wine as sweet or sweeter than your food. Otherwise, it's like brushing your teeth and drinking orange juice. Yes, that horrible taste. So this Vigneault would be really good as it could stand in for Riesling as well. As they call it, turkey run. I don't know if turkey run had anything to do with the fact that it would be a good pair for turkey, but it would, in theory, probably go well with your turkey and cleanse your palate and balance out all of the richness of the gravy you might be having, or mashed potatoes or stuffing. Certainly would highlight the lots of fruit and herbal elements of your dishes. All right, any other comments on the Vigneault? Again, Cuco Lake Vineyards Turkey Run Vigneault is the first wine we had. That is pronounced Vigneault. The G and S are typically silent. Is a French hybrid originally. So the next one we're going to taste is Sauvignon Blanc. It is from Benmarl Winery in the Hudson River region. So hopefully you'll be able to get your hands on this. This is owned by the Spaccarelli family. So go ahead and grab your glass. Take a look at it. Again, color, to me, pretty pale straw. Any other comments on that? Yeah, there are a little bit of bubbles in my glass, which I don't know if anybody else is seeing that. So the basic, let's remember, the basic alcohol fermentation equation is sugar from the grapes plus yeast that are either wild or that we add equals alcohol, and then byproducts are carbon dioxide and heat. So when we make a sparkling wine, if we remember from July, in the traditional method, we would capture the carbon dioxide in to produce bubbles. That's where bubbles come from, you know, in the traditional method. But sometimes we find a table wine that has just a little bit of CO2 left over in it. Whether it's intentional or not is up to the winemaker. It's a part of the winemaking process. So sometimes you might find a few bubbles in, and that's why. What do we smell in this wine? Don't be shy. Lots of green apple. Kind of that limestone character. Even almost like a grassy character, kind of reminiscent of Sauvignon Blanc. So Sauvignon Blanc, have you heard of it? Maybe not so much. It is one of the most widely planted hybrid grapes on the East Coast. It is often has malolactic fermentation, malolactic fermentation from a previous tasting series, remember, is converting our malic acid into lactic. Overall, it lowers a little bit of acidity. It's often done with red wines and only some white wines, but it produces that, sometimes can produce diacetyl, which is a buttery component that you might smell. Often oak chardonnays have malolactic fermentation done to them. But Savo Blanc, definitely grown again in upstate New York. Anything else in the aroma? A little bit of stone fruit maybe, and again, a little bit of maybe honeydew melon. Anything else? All right, go ahead and taste it. Remember, pay attention to all those structural elements going on. And so in this wine, what do you taste? What flavors come out? Often, again, a lot of what we taste comes from our sense of smell. This definitely tastes like bright Granny Smith apples to me. Very appley. In terms of acidity, is it low, medium, and high? Low, medium, or high? Acidity, that mouth-watering, jaw-tensing, it's still pretty high. Not quite as high as the Vignole. Vignole was very high, but this would definitely be medium plus acidity, if not probably still considered high acidity. Is it dry in the middle or sweet? It is dry. This is also dry. Again, very fruit forward, which might be a little hard to tell then if it's sweetness or fruit, but this is, if you're not sure, plug your nose and take a sip and you won't taste sugar, or it would be a teeny minimal amount. So on the International Riesling Foundation scale, dry is considered anything less than 1%. So all these, dry wines could have, 0.5%, even 0.75% sugar in them, but would still be labeled dry. These are definitely both labeled dry. And then we go up 1 to 2% is off dry, 2 to 4% residual sugar is medium sweet, and then anything above 4% would be sweet, and that can go all the way up to, dessert ice wines have like 15% residual sugar, just to give you an idea. What is the body like? Would you say skim 1-2 whole, cream? I would probably give this like a 1%, medium minus body. And then where do you feel that warming sensation? Nose, throat, or chest? I feel like this one is between my throat and chest. Yeah, so I would guess it's around 12.5, 13%. It is, according to the label, it is 11.8. If you have the bottle in front of you. Any other comments or thoughts on this wine? All right. Moving on then to our last wine, which is from Northern Flow Vineyards, their Marquette. And this is located in Clayton, New York, up in the Thousand Islands region, really northern New York. So before I worked for the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, I was a professor of wine at Jefferson Community College, which is in Watertown, New York. And I can testify that it actually is -3-degree temperatures for days on end up there. And so that Vitis vinifera, typical or more traditional wine grapes can't survive those temperatures. So they grow hybrids that were developed originally by the University of Minnesota called Cold Hardy, COLD-HARDY, not heart. Cold Hardy grapes that can withstand up to -40-degree temperatures. So typical, or the more common cold hardy varieties are Frontenac, Frontenac Blanc, Frontenac Gris, La Crescent, Marquette, Edelweiss, Prairie Star. Those are all examples. And these are typically grown in the Lake Champlain AVA and Thousand Islands region of New York. Some are also grown. Marquette is actually grown in the Finger Lakes and Hudson Valley as well. But it's cold hardy grapes are pretty much all at the very northernly part of New York State can grow, because it does get that cold. So Northern Flow opened in 2016, relatively newer winery. And if we take a look at the glass, so again, we're having now a red wine. Red wines generally are ruby-ish in color, and then we go towards, you know, sometimes you can have like a ruby garnet if it's going brown, and sometimes you can have like a ruby purple. This one I would pretty classify dead on ruby, maybe slightly going towards purple, but great intensity and color. The cold hardy hybrid reds definitely have lots of great color intensity. All right, go ahead and swirl it. What do we smell? So while you're smelling, I'll give you a little bit of history. So Marquette is a cold hardy hybrid that was developed by the University of Minnesota in 2006. It's got some Pinot Noir in its heritage. Its grandparent is Pinot Noir crossed with a cold hardy Riparia species. That's another type of native species. So it is very cold hardy. It gets pretty good sugar accumulation, which we call Brix, B-R-I-X, in the wine industry. And so it has had a lot of potential and is, like I said, produced now around New York State. So what do we smell? Lots of black cherry. Black cherry is definitely the most dominating thing that I smell. Definitely getting pepper, and I would say both bell pepper. So it's got like that herbaceousness from a bell pepper characteristic, but it also definitely has black pepper. And I think there's some oak here. I would say kind of get like hints of leather, a little bit of that like vanilla character. I also see plum in the descriptors coming in, and I definitely agree with that. Anything else? All right, go ahead and taste this one. Is anybody at home going? All right, so if you're new to red wines or wine appreciation, that is tannins that you're feeling. It's kind of like a chalky texture coating your teeth and tongue. That's a textural component to the wine. And tannins are found in the skins, seeds, and stems of grapes. So back to our winemaking 101, the difference between red and white winemaking is, I'll give you a second to type in. The difference between red and white winemaking is red wines ferment on the skins. So both get harvested, crushed and destemmed. Then white wines get pressed off their skins right away typically, and then go through the fermentation process. Red wines don't get pressed off the skins. They get fermented on the skins. And so they extract the color of the skins and the tannins from the skins through the winemaking period. And then they both go through clarification and bottling, but that's winemaking 101 in a very quick nutshell. So acidity, mouth water, jaw tensing, like biting into a lemon. Where do you feel like acidity fell on this wine? Not as high as the previous two. Still cool climate, and again, the cold hardy hybrids in general are definitely known for having generally higher levels of acidity, but I would say that this one was probably in the world of wines, medium plus acidity. It definitely doesn't seem nearly as high as the other two because tannins are, give you this mouth drying effect, and acidity is like mouth watering. So it's kind of like a tug of war in your mouth going on between acidity and tannins. Think of them as like, if you were thinking of something perfectly in balance, you think about your structural elements and acidity, tannins, sugar, how they're all playing out and how they often make another structural element seem not as high. So tannin levels are, in the world of wines, probably like a medium, maybe even medium minus tannin level. When you think of Malbecs or Shiraz or Cabernet Sauvignon, they typically have high levels of acidity. Again, depends on always where it's grown and the producer. There's so many factors that make every wine different. But in general, those would be categorized as high. This is probably more, I said, medium minus tannins. Is it dry in the middle or sweet? It is dry, good. And then alcohol content, do you feel warming, body first. Is it like skim 1, 2, whole, or cream? Of the wines we've tried today, this one has the most body, but in the world of wines, it would probably be considered medium body. Kind of like 2% milk. And then that alcohol content, again, a warming sensation. Do you feel it in your nose, throat, chest? Where do you think you feel that warming sensation? Yeah, definitely. This one was definitely the most, I think, of the three we had today. I would guess that this one's more like 13, maybe even 13.5% alcohol. Let's see. Now, a wine only has to say table wine. It doesn't have to have the alcohol percent on it. And if it says table wine, you just have to know it's between that 7 and 16% required to put the specific, though a lot of wineries do put it on the bottle. This one, if you have the bottle, does say 13.5%. So yes, you're definitely right, chest wine. So any questions, thoughts, comments overall? We've tasted wines from all over New York State today. And again, we should talk about some of the other popular hybrids grown in New York State. So Cayuga is a really popular white that's grown a lot in the Finger Lakes. Also, again, across that whole, Buffalo to Albany, Hudson Valley, Lake Erie to Hudson Valley region. That was developed by the University of Cornell, or Cornell University. And it has it generally has medium plus acidity, lots of fruit forward aromas, and is a crisp grape that's used to make its own varietal, as well as often used in a blending agent with other whites like Riesling and Chardonnay. Another really popular one I want to mention is Treminette. So Treminette is the child of Gewürztraminer, and also grown a lot, particularly in the Finger Lakes. It's not, so Gewürztraminer is we haven't gotten to Gewürztraminer yet, we'll be tasting that in the future, but Gewürztraminer is a really aromatic, spicy, like baking spice, and floral, super floral, like roses types of aromas. And so Treminette has a lot of aromatics to it, has a little more acidity than Gewürztraminer typically, and grows really well again across from that central, I guess what some people would call upstate New York, but really pretty much central New York State across the thruway pretty much. So other reds that you might be familiar with, particularly in the Hudson Valley, but also grown in the Finger Lakes, are Baca Noir, Chambourcin, Leon Mayo. Those are all grown a lot in the Hudson Valley. But as I said, you can find other places. And I named some of the other cold hardies earlier, La Crescent, Frontenac. So these are all names of the actual grapes and wines themselves. They're, you know, sometimes people aren't familiar with them, so they're not sure. And the best way to learn about them is to just try them and keep an open mind. Again, every winery will have a different one. So if you don't love one that you have from one winery, still give it another shot at a different winery. It all goes back to those structural elements. So do you like wines with acidity, high or low? Do you like wines that are sweet or dry or somewhere in the middle? Do you like wines with tannins or without tannins, or low or high tannins, right? So the more you taste wines and are familiar with what structural elements you like in a wine, the more you'll be more comfortable, I think, going out and tasting and buying the ones you want to have. So that's our discussion on hybrids. And sometimes hybrid grapes are called heirloom varieties now. They are being talked about more and more, and there, like I said, there are a lot of them. But it's a cross between two species generally to produce a grape that can be more disease resistant and cold hardy while maintaining some of the wine characteristics of the vinifera species. So that's our hybrid discussion for today. Does anybody have any questions? If you want to type them in the Q&A feature or the chat bar, I do also want to let you know, I said that our next scheduled virtual tasting series is December 22nd, but on December 18th, we are having a bonus little pop-up virtual tasting. My colleague Paul Brady, our New York Wine Brand Ambassador, and I will be doing a tasting together with some New York wines, and we'll be talking more about pairing wines for your upcoming holidays. But if anybody has any questions in depth more about what to pair with Thanksgiving, any of these we had today would be food friendly for your turkey. As I said, Marquette has Pinot Noir in its ancestry, so Pinot Noir and Gamay Noir are often the typical reds, and Cabernet Franc too, which is another great red from New York State, are all really food friendly and great with turkey and herbaceous notes. So like if you have herbs in your stuffing, or even your green bean casserole, they'd all make great pairs. If you're thinking more white, typically they're both very aromatic and again lend lots of flavors and aromas to your meal. Treminette and Vigneault would also be great stand-ins or recommendations. And then of course, always bubbles are always great for every meal. They cleanse your mouth, get you exciting and craving and wanting more. They generally have high acidity, so crisp, refreshing, mouth-watering, and they're great to celebrate with. So definitely, I will be bringing bubbles to my Thanksgiving feast for sure to celebrate. So with that being said, if there are no questions, I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining me. I did tell you I would put my contact information in the chat bar, so let me put in my email address real quick. If you have any further questions, again, don't ever be shy to put them in, but if you want to follow up with anything or have any future recommendations for tastings or series or things we could do education-wise, I would love to hear them. So my email and phone number are now in the chat. Thanks so much for joining me today, and hopefully I'll see you in December. Have a very happy Thanksgiving with your family, or whoever you're celebrating with. Have a happy Thanksgiving. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.